Now recording. Sarah, take it away.
Thanks. Let's begin in prayer. The Lord be with you.
It's with you.
Let us pray. Loving and gracious God, we know that all that we have and all that we are is a gift from you. Help us in this time to understand how we might share the gift of stewardship with our communities. Give us patience as we navigate virtual life and pandemic life. Give us courage and boldness to seek to do your will always. Give us wisdom and strength for all that is before us, and give us joyful and happy hearts as we recognize the gifts that you give us and continue to give us always. All this we pray in your most holy name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Sarah.
Well, welcome everyone. My name is Sarah Fisher. I am the Vice President of the Board of TENS, the Episcopal Network for Stewardship, and I'm just so delighted to see all of y'all here. I'm also from the South, so I say y'all a lot. Apologies in advance. And I'm the rector of St. Catherine's Episcopal Church in Marietta, Georgia, which is also one of the joys of my life. I discovered TENS in 2007 when I was the rector of a small, wonderful parish in the heart of Chicago. And I knew we needed a stewardship campaign, and somebody said, you ought to go check out TENS. And I went sort of expecting this like silver bullet. This is what you do. This is how you raise up good stewardship campaigns. And what happened to me in that conference, this was back when we were doing conferences a little bit more, was that I heard people talk about the life-changing power of stewardship. And I'm not a crier, and I began to weep in this in this hotel room, banquet room full of church people, because I suddenly realized I wanted some of what they had. I wanted that love of giving and that love of stewardship, and I realized I didn't have it. So I came back to my church and started a team to read a book. They'll tell you that I lied to them because I said, I just want you to read the book with me. And in reality, I knew I wanted them to become a stewardship team. And over the course of my time at that church, our stewardship increased. I used to know the number. It was big. It was a big number percentage-wise. And I fell more and more in love with stewardship, which if you'd ever told me that in a million years I would like stewardship, I would have said you're crazy. And now it's just one of the things I love to talk about. I think Walter Brueggemann has wisely said, one of the greatest spiritual crises we have is our relationship with our money, and stewardship affords us the chance to be honest about that and especially in, I would say, a pandemic. So that's a little bit about me and why I'm here and happy to be here. I also just love TENS. It's an organization that changed my life, and I am thrilled today to be here with you, Davey. And if you don't know, we've got Davey Gerhard with us. He's the executive director of TENS, the Episcopal Network for Stewardship. Many of you may have been with us 2 weeks ago with Davey and my fellow board member, Chris Harris, and they talked about virtual stewardship campaigns in general. Your feedback helped us craft today's presentation, which will be specifically about how to use the TENS resources for your virtual stewardship campaigns this year. As members of TENS, either through your diocese or through your parish, the resources are free for download from our website, and we hope that with today's guide, everyone will use them to raise money in their congregations this year. Davey is joining us from his non-air-conditioned home in San Francisco, where he and his partner amicably share bandwidth and common space while working from home. Davey attends Holy Innocents Church in San Francisco's, I'm not going to say this right, is it Noe Valley? Noe Valley neighborhood, where he's been the chair of the stewardship committee for the last 22 years. Awesome.
It never ends.
So I'm just going to jump in. Every year, Davey, TENS adapts a theme for stewardship campaigns. This year's is faith-filled generosity. Can you tell us a little bit about this theme and particularly why it's important this year? And for those of you who've used TENS stewardship in the fall campaign in the past, who know it, why is this year different from last year?
Wonderful.
Or years past.
I'm sharing my screen with y'all so you can join along with us. So I will answer that question, but before I do, I wanted to remind some folks who have just joined us that we are recording today, so you might notice the little record button. You are being recorded, thank you. We are taking your questions using the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. So if you type your questions into that, we will stop every few slides and catch up and answer your questions. If you have specific technical things, like you suddenly can't hear us, or you want to share a resource with everyone, put that into the chat. So chat for technical questions, and then Q&A for questions about the resources or the content that we're covering. So thank you. Faithful generosity. When TENS develops a theme, we do that in a way so that we can focus our efforts on a particular aspect of our stewardship and our generosity. This year, as we've been moving through Matthew's gospel and learning about the life of Jesus and how he teaches us to be in relationship and community, we take these ideas and we build them into how our faith, how our theology forms us to be generous, beautiful, wonderful people of God. And that is how our stewardship is designed for this year. So it's a call to each of us to be generous and ready to share, as it says in our scripture in 1 Timothy listed at the top of this slide. Generous and ready to share, so that our ministries may be supported and our personal lives dedicated to the good work of the people of God. As we've been moving through Matthew's gospel, we've heard how Jesus teaches us to be in relationship. And relationship, we'll go over this over and over again today. Relationship is key in our stewardship, because when we talk about money, when we talk about our resources and sharing them, these are pastoral, relational conversations between humans. And we need to remember that. We often talk about, and I'm a money guy, I'm a fundraiser, so I talk about fundraising and money in church, but I always have to remember that it's a human story that we are telling, and these are human experiences. And the transformative moments happen in sharing those stories with each other, and then sharing our abundance with the church and what it can do then with the world. So we are inspired by our faith to be generous people. Sarah's question was, what is different about stewardship in 2020? And I could say, what is different about the whole world in 2020? We are a different place than we were just 6 months ago. And so today we're going to be talking about how you can run your stewardship campaign if you are in a 100% virtual church meeting, so you're all online every Sunday, or if you're in a part of the country where some churches are reopening their doors to full or small reduced numbers, and you may have a hybrid relationship, so people still viewing your service online and still participating online, and then you may have people in the pews again. So we're going to walk through some strategies on how to reach everyone and make them feel a part of stewardship, whether you are meeting virtually or hybrid, or if you're blessed enough to be fully back in person again. That would be wonderful. We're also going to cover some questions about how we talk about stewardship and asking people for their gifts when there is economic fallout and uncertainty. Not every region is experiencing this in the same way. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but we do need to name the so-called elephant in the room. As we talk about stewardship and money this year, we are facing a world that is different than it was in the abundance and boom of the last few years that we've been experiencing. So how to talk about that in this environment, we'll be covering that as well. If you've been using our resources year after year, or if this is even your first year, one of the things you'll notice right up front is that we published a how-to guide for our stewardship resources this year. And that's available for download so that you can, in English and in Spanish, so that you can use that to create your timeline and to marshal your resources for stewardship this year. So this is a new document. You wouldn't have seen this in years past. And it begins with a pre-checklist, if you will, on things to think about before you begin your campaign. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the technology you may use to collect money and pledges online and how you are gathering virtually. So the first thing I want to say about your virtual stewardship campaigns or your hybrid stewardship campaigns this year is that you run them in the same format that people have gotten used to over the past few months of virtual church. So if you're using Zoom or Facebook Live or YouTube Live or Google Hangouts, whatever platform your folks have become comfortable with, use that for your stewardship this year because it'll make things easier. They won't have to learn a new platform as you then begin this campaign.
Smart.
So, yeah, so choose your technology and then keep going with it. Thank you for that correction. I get talking fast sometimes. Make sure that your website, your social media, streaming services, and newsletters are offering ways to gather pledges and gifts online. A couple weeks ago, we went through many of the most common platforms that you can use either on your phone or your desktop to make pledges and to receive gifts virtually. So in a place where we can't pass an offering plate, or in a time when we can't pass an offering plate, or just to increase the diversity of ways in which people can make pledges and donations to your congregation, we're recommending that this year as you move into stewardship, you have as many of those ways as you can implemented, tested, and ready to go across all of the channels, newsletter, website, social media, so that people can access that and begin making their pledges this year online. And a check-in, have you looked at your newsletter recently? I know because they're easy to do this way. You copy the last newsletter that you did and you just change some dates and times. And that's a perfectly fine way to do a newsletter, especially when you are trying to create them weekly. And you'll notice perhaps that after you've seen that format after, say, a month or 6 months, or maybe you haven't changed your format in years, it becomes a little stale and people may not be responding the same way that they used to your newsletter. So I'm going to take this advice in Ten's newsletter as well, just shake up the format a little and move things around, let people know that stewardship is different this year and that their newsletter you can use it to tease out those stories, those testimonials, help people understand why things are different and what you're doing in your campaign this year. I'm going to go through a few more slides before we answer some more questions. One of the things that we help you with this year is gathering your team and giving you some support. We're going to give you a job description later on what stewardship committee small group leaders might be like and how to form them and how to work with them. And then gather the people who are going to be a part of your stewardship campaign. One of the most important ones is the storytelling that happens at stewardship time, as we share our own experiences. And Sarah modeled at the beginning of this conversation how she came to be a supporter and how she came to fall in love with stewardship. When we tell those stories in our own congregations about how we came to be a member, what brought us in and made us feel at home, why we didn't go to the church down the street instead, why this became our place, and what ministries excite us about this work, that's how we tell the story of our stewardship to each other. And when we make our gifts, we ask others to join us. So gathering those testimonials, if you're meeting virtually, you can pre-record them and play them into your service and make those easy to do. And we'll talk a little bit later in our liturgical resources on where those might fit into your service. We're recommending this year, and we're going to talk about it a lot in this presentation, small groups to do your stewardship. You may already be a congregation that uses small groups at your stewardship campaign time, house churches or dinners or whatever. This year, if you are virtual, we're going to ask you to do those small groups virtually. We're going to give you tools and best practices on how to do that. But it's a really important step when we are trying to get the message out about stewardship, generosity, and our mission, that we form some real intentional formation with each other about that. And small groups are a great way to do that. And finally, what are your stewardship materials? Do you usually create like a trifold brochure or a color thing front and back about your ministry, mission, your budget, where the money is coming from and how it's being spent? Do those materials again this year. They're very important, especially as you won't be gathering perhaps in person to be able to talk through it. You'll have to rely on people getting that either through their email or the post office or through a small group process. So make that case for giving, make it clear, make it easy to read, and make it concise. If you're presenting a budget, either a line item or narrative or both, start now, get those numbers together and begin creating that so that you can send that out with your stewardship packet. Budgets are sometimes helpful. Narrative budgets are even more helpful because they tell the story of how we spend our money rather than focusing on, utilities and maintenance and things like that, which are also important. But please use your budgeting tools and share that so that there's transparency with your community. How is the money being received and spent? And finally, pledge cards. So we give you an option, and there was a question earlier about the adaptability of that. We give you pledge cards in English and in Spanish in Microsoft Word so that you can adapt those to your own need, your own size, your own use. And put those out either electronically or in the mail this year. We'll give you a timeline. And so this is another one of the new documents that we provide this year for you. In the pre-campaign, start early. You're here in August. I'm so proud of you for being ready to embrace stewardship in August and not waiting till after Labor Day to get your stuff together. So start early. And remember, everything takes longer in the pandemic than it does before because we are operating at so many levels and trying to keep so many plates spinning, right? All of us in our personal lives and our work lives and our church lives. So start early. Give stewardship the time it needs to develop and form, and so that everybody's ready. We said this earlier, research your technology. Everything that you're going to use for stewardship, if that's an online platform to accept pledges, if that's your website, if that's your new newsletter, whatever that is, research it, make sure that it works, make sure people know how to use it. Build the hype and prepare theologically. So use these months of August and September to begin making announcements about the faith-filled generosity theme. We give you a downloadable one-page sheet on how we developed the theme and what it means theologically. That's a tool you can use to begin getting people to think about it. Also let people know it's exciting. Things are happening. We're about to do stewardship. Begin it now. TENS also gives Pentecost season reflections as well. So we do weekly reflections, which we'll talk about during the stewardship cycle. But in the pre-campaign, we also provide meditations that sort of summarize the Gospels for the month and give you a way to prepare people now theologically for the themes of stewardship and get them ready. So please do use those and take advantage of them. We're recommending this year that you drop your first letter from the clergy, and we give you options in Word in English and in Spanish to be able to do that. To create a letter, we give you some sample copy and then insert places where you might tell your own mission-related stories that are specific to your church. So we recommend that you drop those around mid-September, so after Labor Day, but before, right in the middle of September. Put those in the mail, send them an email, along with, get people prepared. That letter from the clergy is a theological reminder that stewardship is coming up. We're inviting everyone to participate. And so please get that ready to go. These letters are great ways to summarize and begin your campaign. During the campaign, so our Stewardship Weekly series begins on October 4th and it runs through November 22nd. So we recommend that you kick off at the beginning of October. Again, let's keep in mind, everything takes a little longer in the pandemic. And so I know my own preference in stewardship is usually do them quickly. 4-week campaigns are really nice because they get it in and done and people don't have to go through it. And I'm recommending that because we're meeting in a virtual or hybrid way, people may not be there every Sunday like they are. So let's use the full 2 months of October and November to run stewardship this year. So if you kick off on October 4th, that's great. If yours is a congregation that uses the Feast of St. Francis to talk about animals and figure out how we virtually bless dogs and cats and snakes, you may not have time in that to do your kickoff. Give it the time it needs and begin the next Sunday on the 11th. Not every congregation does the same thing on Francis Day. So just want to give you some options there. After your kickoff, so whatever week follows your kickoff, send the next letter. And that's the letter that's either from your wardens or from your campaign chair. And with that letter, either in post or email, send it with your stewardship materials. So everything that we talked about that packet should go out in the mail. This year, it's unlikely that we're going to be able to rely on people picking up their envelopes at the back of the church. So budget for the postage that it may need. Sometimes stewardship packets are heavier and bigger than your normal mail might be. So you might have to think about that. Rely on email. You can send that as many times as you want. It's free. And we give you everything so that you can do it in PDFs or in Word and put that into your documentation. So please do use your use the post or email, send that second letter. Finally, we'll be going through the weekly pledge inserts during your campaign. Every Sunday, they're tied to the readings, and they help us tease out a particular stewardship theme from the readings of the day and convene those small groups. We'll talk about them in more detail in a minute. Finally, in the timeline, your end of campaign. So celebrate your dedication Sunday. If you do it on Christ the King or if you do it on First Advent, either one is great. We're recommending that you do it right then, either at the end of November or the first Sunday in Advent. Celebrate, actually they're both at the end of November this year. Celebrate your campaign, announce your totals, get everyone excited about what's just happened, and use that time to throw the biggest online Zoom party you can. I was having a great conversation with a rector in Akron, Ohio last week, and she was talking about her dedication Sunday for her stewardship campaign and how she was lamenting that they won't be able to do what they usually do, which is to have a big lunch in a parishioner's beautiful home, and they open it up to everyone and people have a great time. And they're just not going to be able to do that this year. So they're talking about how do we do it? And she had a really creative idea that they will engage a catering company and people will pick up their lunch at the catering and bring it back to their house. And they'll all get on Zoom to have their dedication Sunday kickoff or their celebration together, right? So they won't be able to meet in person at someone's lovely home, but they will be able to share the same meal and be able to talk about it and have a family meal. So this was their way of kind of planning for that. Whatever you do, make it a big deal. You've just accomplished something amazing. You've unlocked this abundance and this generosity in your community. Take time to really celebrate it and do a proper dedication Sunday. Thank all of your leadership. You can't thank them enough for the hours that they've spent, 22 years on a stewardship committee. Please thank your stewardship committee folks. They've done a lot of work, and remind everyone that it takes a big team to do this work, and that lots of folks have been doing this. Remember the mission. Always tie your stewardship, the money that you've raised, back into what you're doing for the church and the community. This is really important work, and I know that you know it, but sometimes we get lost in our church budgets, and we talk about how we're spending the money internally, which is necessary, and we forget that we exist to help the outside world as well, and the people outside our church. So let's remember always to talk about the mission, what we're supporting with our gifts, the ministries and missions in our communities that are a part of that. Finally, at your dedication Sunday and shortly thereafter, the Monday following, as soon as you can get people together again, implement a follow-up plan to reach your households that have not yet turned in their pledges. It happens every year. And often after a busy campaign season, the last thing your stewardship committee wants to do is make phone calls and bug people. And it often, in my experience, can linger into January where you're still trying to clear up last year's pledge campaign. So let's try not to do that this year. Let's implement a follow-up plan as quickly as you can and reach out to households. It's a great opportunity if people haven't pledged to talk about why. And we're going to go through some questions in a little bit here about why people may not be pledging and the opportunities for pastoral conversations you can have. But please do implement a plan. I'm going to stop for a minute and take a drink of water and ask Sarah if there are any questions that we can answer.
There's one specific question, and then I've got some notes from watching. Sharon wants to know, what would you suggest if we start 1 month earlier and to be done earlier? How adaptable are these resources to a different timeline?
That's a beautiful question, Sharon. I love that you're thinking of getting this done in September. Our weekly inserts are tied to the lectionary from October 4th through November 22nd. So the weekly inserts won't start for you until October the 4th. So that piece, I would say, sadly this year, not adaptable to an earlier start. But I think that all the other best practices and principles we're talking about, absolutely. If you can get your campaign materials ready and you want to accelerate your timeline, and you have a congregation that is ready to do that work, go for it. I know many congregations kind of take time to gear back up in September, right, where everything starts back up after the summer, but we haven't had the kind of summer that we've had in the past. Nobody's taken those long vacations and families away all summer and coming back. So you may have people who are ready, a whole community ready to do your stewardship in September. Go for it. But sadly, our weekly inserts probably won't be of use to you if you do it all in September.
I wonder if that might be, you know, we talk about creative storytelling. I wonder if that might be an opportunity to think of who are some of the theologians in residence in your congregation who might write a response. You know, if you've got that kind of skill set too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so Darlene says we are in a resort area, and so we try to start our campaign in August. So I would think the same would apply for y'all as well. That you certainly can. From what I'm hearing, Davey, in my own experience, is that they're absolutely adaptable, with the exception of those that are linked directly to the lectionary. St. Paul's Church is asking, our committee shifted to a 3-week campaign. Is there a downside to a shorter campaign?
There's not a downside. I would say that this year, it depends on, so you've been experiencing your community virtually for the past few months. And I would say to you, what's that been like? Do you have a pretty full participation? Are people able to gather virtually and you feel like they're ready to engage stewardship in which you want as much participation as possible. If they're ready to do that and they're meeting and you feel like in 3 Sundays you can do it all and reach everyone that you need to reach when we are meeting virtually, then I think you know your congregation well enough to be able to make that call. I would say from our standpoint that many congregations are not in that place. Attendance goes week to week virtually as people join and come back. We are also experiencing people joining our communities that aren't members. I don't know if you're experiencing that, but it's a beautiful thing to experience. Wow, people who aren't members coming into our virtual services because they're hungry for the kind of gospel we're preaching. That's beautiful. So in order to give them time to participate, and I don't know if your virtual services are getting that kind of outside the community or the usual players, if you're getting them in, but I would say you might want to give them time to learn about stewardship and get into the community. But again, no problem with a quicker stewardship campaign if you are set up and that's what your community is expecting. Don't drag it out if you don't need to.
One more question's come in about timing. Resort area congregants return either in November or January, timing suggestions. So I think we've kind of covered that, but I think you can totally use the materials. The only thing that really I think is probably a timing issue there is around the lectionary piece.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's see. I wanted to, there's some more questions coming in. This is great. They're starting to come in. But I wanted, several people asked me early in the book I was talking about that I worked on with the folks a gazillion years ago when I first got into TENS. And I honestly can't, I think it was Growing Congregations of Generous Givers. Does that sound right, Davey?
Yeah, growing.
Something like that. And what I'll say is I've used a bunch of different books. We've got resources, suggested resources, and I'll make sure that particular book, it's a little dated, but I don't think it's too dated.
I think it's Growing Generous Hearts or
something like that. It's something like that. But can I get you that information, Davey, later, and we can include that?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, we'll put in the email that goes out after this, and I believe it's on our resources website.
I think it is too. So Tom says, I'm pretty new to stewardship work. How do you conduct those post-campaign follow-up meetings when you're asking folks why they haven't pledged? Are there trainings or resources available?
Aha, great. Well, we're going to go, the next 3 slides after this are going to go into some of the sticky questions that we might encounter this year around pledge campaigns. So I might answer some of your questions later. But in general, I'll just remind you that, or remind us that conversations about stewardship are pastoral, relational conversations. And when you're asking people about why they have or haven't pledged, you're really asking them about their relationship to the community and the work that you're doing. And some people may have budget reasons, family reasons, employment reasons for why they don't participate in a pledge. I know some people are opposed to pledges in general, right? There is a kind of theology of there's a thinking out there that people don't want to make pledges. They'd like to make faith gifts. It's harder to budget on faith gifts than it is on pledges, but some people do that. So whatever reason people give is an opportunity for you, the asker of that question, to learn more about them and their process and how they engage. If there's some formation that can happen in those moments, like you can say, I understand that you don't want to make a pledge, and it's really hard for us to budget around that. Have you ever thought about it? You know, like what would it look like for you to make a pledge? And if they say no, well then, you know, no.
If I can come in there for a second, one of the things that I've found is that there's just a lot of anxiety in asking people about money and like, would you give some money? And when we get brave enough to actually have those conversations, a lot of times what I've experienced is people telling me, oh, I thought I was pledging by doing X, not realizing that that they hadn't done what we considered, like they hadn't filled out the form. So they were giving regularly, they just didn't know it wasn't a pledge. Or, likewise, well, I just really haven't known what I should pledge, so I just haven't done it. And you will get all those other answers too, of like, I don't pledge, or I'm mad at the rector, or whatever. But there's also, to your point, just a real level of education, and we can begin to be a little bit more comfortable talking about money with people. We may find that people are really grateful for the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. I usually go into those conversations too with some facts. For example, I might say, 90% of our members pledge, but not everyone does. So you find yourself in whichever category, and we love you equally. I might say, so my diocese publishes annually the average pledge. They look at everyone's parochial report and divide it up by the number of people, and they come up with an average. So an average household pledges this much. And then my parish does that as well. So we say our average gift size is, and that's not a, you must pledge at this. It's that it's a beginning place for that person who says, I've never pledged before. I don't know what to pledge. What's a reasonable pledge? And those answers are deeply personal, but you give them some questions or some answers like, well, this $2,300 is the average pledge size in our congregation, for example. If you wanted, if you have access to that data, that's not to say do it. It's just to say, here's what an average is. Where do you find yourself? The back of our pledge card also has the proportional giving. Years ago, decades now, I believe, General Convention of the Episcopal Church recommended that we all proportionately give in our congregations. So that's to say, I'm going to give 1% of my income or whatever, right? So we give you those calculations, those handy calculations based on household income and percentage, so that you can sort of figure out, what does 1% of my income look like over in a weekly pledge? What am I doing? And make some decisions about your own household budget. We never want anyone to go into debt to make a pledge to the church. Your family and your household comes first, of course, but we give you options to be reasonable about that.
Great. We've got a lot of questions that have started coming in.
I
think some have come into the chat as well, so I will try to get to those in a minute. Just a reminder, if you've got a question, pop it in the Q&A, if you will. Anonymous attendee says, and I love this question, and I'm happy to answer it if you want. Or I'll give it my best shot and then hear what you've got to say. Speaking of new online visitors, our rector has been reluctant to sound to these newcomers like a televangelist. Preach, I understand. What do you suggest as ways to avoid that concern? And I'll tell you, I really struggled with that because it really does feel that way, like, please me. So I have a little speech I do, and it is this long, and it is, I think it's literally, thank you for those who've been able to keep up your pledges. We're really grateful they're helping us keep the church running at this time. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I have resources available for you. And I want to help. The church, your church wants to help you in this moment. And what I find is it's the balance. You talked earlier about mission. It's the balance of, yeah, we still need the money to operate. And it's not just so that we can operate, it's so that we can help folks who've lost their jobs and who need a bill to be paid and stuff like that. So for me, that's worked pretty well. Our pledges have thankfully stayed really strong during the season. And part of what I know is that bringing it to consciousness of saying, we still need for you to turn in your pledges or to give is really important.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right, Sarah. If you keep it focused on the mission, then it doesn't feel like a televangelist pitch. The other thing, though, is be bold. I mean, money is a part of our lives, and it is a part of our Christian community. Jesus preached about it 40% of the time in the parables, right? So it's a recurring theme in ministry, and so if we handle that situation appropriately, I believe, as you illustrate, it becomes about the mission and it becomes about the work, and no gift is too small, and there are resources. If you can't make a gift, we understand that. we have ways to help you. Keeping it mission focused, definitely the way to go. I entertained a question recently from someone who said they were bold enough to ask this question, and I appreciated it. Well, we're not meeting in person, and so what am I getting for my pledge? That was a bold question, right? And we walked through that. Well, thank you for asking that question. That's a statement. Your priest is still working very hard to keep your congregation running and working even perhaps harder in the pandemic to keep our community going. So while you may not be seeing each other in person and the doors of your church may be closed, the church is open. And so what I encouraged that person to do was not think about their giving as transactional, but as spirit-led, grace-led. What are we really doing with the gifts? So that church in particular was still supporting a food pantry, and they were still supporting an ESL ministry that they had moved to an online one. Great work. And so that work, the needs of our community continue. And so when people say, stay away from that transactional conversation, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think also, and we need to move on because we've got a lot of questions that have come in, but I realize there are people who are outside of our communities who are watching, and we don't want to exclude them, but at the same time, the people within our communities know us and hopefully trust us. So there's, I think that for me is what I sort of remind myself when I feel especially televangelist, which is not very often. Rev Susan says, we've had about half of the pre-COVID numbers attending now via Zoom. I don't want to leave anyone out. So I guess that would be a nod to making sure you're getting your materials into multiple platforms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You want to add anything to that?
No, that's it. I mean, all the ways. So in the pandemic, we have to communicate more, I think, than we may be used to. Our online channels, our social media channels, picking up the phone channels, all the ways that we need to communicate and reach out are really important. And people are handling the isolation differently. Some people want a phone call. Some people like Zoom. Some people are enjoying being left alone. How does your community and how do your parishioners, your people. So reach out to them in all the ways that they need.
Okay, Davey, we've got a lot more questions coming in.
Okay, keep going.
Just a comment from someone that they published average pledges one year and some people lowered their pledges. So I guess that could happen. That's unfortunate. No, the book I don't think was Growing Givers' Hearts, but I promise I'll look it up for y'all. Amy wants to know, do you think there's an optimal way for a clergy person to be involved in the stewardship campaign? Do you think a clergy person should know what members give?
Oh, there's a question.
There's $1 million question, right?
Question. I've seen many articles about this. Even the Episcopal Church Foundation has published it. There's a recent article in ENS that came out about this. And the general thinking is, and Sarah, I invite your input into this, because money is often a pastoral concern. Either people are making a pledge or not making a pledge for pastoral reasons. I think it's a question that people should feel comfortable with talking about with their clergy. We should entrust this is as a layperson, I should entrust my clergy with the same boundaries and confidence that I tell them all the other things that are going on that are good and bad about my life. I can share my financial concerns with them as well, and trust that they have the boundaries to hold that. And also trust that when they're looking at me, they're not looking at dollar signs. They wouldn't see many in my regard. But in general, that's not what our clergy do. They see humans and they see that interaction. I worked with a congregation last year that literally had a locked file cabinet of pledges, and they would not give the rector the key to it because they were like, no. And that rector really had to work with them about we understand the pledge secretary, who had been the pledge secretary for 40 years, did not, she had a particular theology about this, but it was an education. Why is it important if the clergy knows what people give and why they stop giving, and how to respond to that? Sometimes we make a change to our pledge before we tell the pastor that we have a medical emergency or we've been laid off, and that's how the pastor has to find out. So we need to think that through. Sarah, what do you?
I would just amen to all that. I have, it's in my parish, it's still a cultural shift for the rector to know. But I mean, I think I'd like also people to know is I don't go home every night and think, well, so-and-so gave this much and so-and-so. I mean, like, I couldn't tell you what people give, but I do know them if and if there's a significant change in the giving in either direction, that's something that's helpful for me to know, because there may be something happening that will be helpful for me as their priest to be with them on. And that has proven true more than once. I think we have a lot of work to do in our theology around money, and shame. Because I think a lot of us carry shame around our money, and that's why we don't want anybody to know. And they're afraid that people are afraid that the priest isn't going to like me, or I'm not going to be their favorite if I don't give it. And that's just so not true. That's so not true. I mean, I don't know any way to say more clearly than that. But yeah, okay. Jim wants to know, we have a large number of members who've given the same amount for years, even decades. Is it appropriate or over the top to point out that 2020 is a year unlike past ones? I love this idea. So this is not the time to be giving the same amount as last year. I'm just going to add, my bishop has said to his clergy recently, like, this is the time to actually be really bold in your asking. For some people, they actually may be doing financially better. They're not eating out as much. They're not driving their cars to work. They're not doing all, this may be a moment where they can actually give more to their church. So, again, it goes to that relationship piece and asking. But you want to answer that, since I just jumped out? I have feelings.
No, that was great. And we're going to talk, I have a couple slides coming up that are going to go into a little bit more detail about that. But absolutely, we can't assume that everyone is impacted the same way by the COVID financial world, right? And some people are in a position to make great gifts, and we should always ask people to look at their stewardship. And how they're giving. To that person who's been giving the same amount for 10 years or more, because I've seen that, I would say, has your income changed in 10 years? Have your personal expenses increased? What do you think that the church is experiencing in that? If your pledge is staying the same and the bills are increasing, then you realize what that's doing to what you're giving to the church, right? There's less buying power, if you will, in that for the church, or there's less, the impact is different if you're not changing your pledge as things change around you. So it's a conversation about economics and about budgeting, and it's a personal conversation. Some people will never give more because that's what they do.
Right. Okay, I'm going to move us along. This question is actually pretty similar to the last one. It's just got a slight nuance to it. Do you recommend that parishioners increase their pledges more than last year's, and do you remind them about last year's pledge? What they pledged last year?
So I'm a fundraiser as a vocation, and so I've done years of stewardship where I've said, last year, Davey, you gave $2,000, and we'd really like you to consider a pledge of $2,500 this year. And that's gone over in different ways at different times in our congregation. Now, if your congregation is if they're used to working with nonprofits, that's the letter that they get every year from their nonprofit. If they're supporting the Sierra Club or whatever, right? It says, hey, Davey, you gave us this much last year, consider this much. When we do that in church, it's a different relationship. People are like, oh, who knows what I gave last year, and why are they asking me for this? So I would say, again, your congregation, if they'll be able to handle that, and there's no shame if they don't want that. As a general rule, I like to remind people what they gave last year at a bare minimum, so that they can remember, oh, I'm giving this much. You may ask them to give a proportional increase, You may ask for nothing, but just sometimes reminding them of what they gave them last year is enough to say, maybe I should give more this year, and have it right in front of them on the letter. Who signs that letter and who's seen that letter, pay attention to that, right?
Right.
So think that one through, so that the letter that's being signed or sent from a person, if they're not expecting that person to know what their pledge data is, don't have that person send that letter. Just think that one through, but I, in general, am a fan of reminding people and asking for an increase. I think it's always good to ask for an increase, even in hard
Do
times.
say no.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know. This one may be a more offline question for later, but anonymous attendee wants to know, what if your treasurer is non-cooperative in providing budgetary information for pledge campaign?
Woo. Get a new treasurer.
Yeah.
We need budget information. As people who are making decisions about next year's budget, we need to know what happened last year, and we need to know how the money, it's transparent and accountable leadership. And I realize that our treasurers are volunteers, that they have lives and they have other things. This is a formation experience for someone who wants to volunteer to be a treasurer, is that they kind of have to provide reports and help you prepare next year's budget.
And that may be, well, I mean, a rector and vestry issue too.
Yeah.
Mary wants to know best practices for money commitments from the vestry.
I love it. First, that they are, and we'll go over this later when we talk about the small groups. Everyone who participates in campaign leadership should make their gifts first. And I love, we should ask our vestries and bishops committees to do their pledge information quickly and right off, because that sets it does two things. When it sets a certain threshold, we've already raised this much money, you can say, we already have 12 gifts in, this is great. And 12 bishops committee members, that's wonderful. But we can do that math, and it's really helpful to know that a certain threshold is being raised. The second thing it does is that when we have already made a gift and we are asking others to participate, now we are inviting them to join us, which is a very different conversation than will you give money to something, because you're saying, I've already made my stake in this, and now I'm asking you to join me. It's a much more authentic conversation. So yes, I think your campaign leadership and your clergy and governance should all make their gifts right up front and first, and you should be able to talk about that.
Yeah, that's one thing we work towards. We don't always do it perfectly, but the vestries pledges are in advance. Okay, last question that I see in the Q&A for right now, which is good because I know you've got more info for us. Regarding publishing average pledges, we talk about proportionate giving, and we publish a graph showing number of pledges by range. So we show the range of amounts that are pledged from low to high, and we make sure to message all pledgers are valued and appreciated as a commitment with the understanding of where people are in their lives. So that's not a question, it's a statement, but it's a helpful one.
It's very helpful. I love those, and people do it as pyramids or as steps or all kinds of different things. It's helpful to know, right? I can see that 5 other families give at the level that I do. Now I know, all right, I'm right on line with this, and I can see what it would take to move up to the next level. Oh, could I do that? Could I imagine myself into that next step? It helps me see what others are doing. So I love that when we provide a range. We have one gift at this mega level, and we have all these other steps, and then it helps us know. We don't tie names to that. We don't see who's doing that, but we can see 6 households are doing that, and 12 households are doing that, and it helps us see ourselves as a part of the whole budget picture.
Also kind of like why that proportional giving chart helps to see where I am. Yeah, I mean, it's all about knowing where you are and the wider community. So.
Yep.
I'm going to move us along a little bit, if that's all right, Davey.
I think we should, and we'll catch up any questions at the end.
I'll keep an eye on this because I know there are a few more coming in. So Davey, stewardship in 2020 comes with more challenges than just the mechanics of the campaign. Has TENS been thinking about how to talk about fundraising in light of the economic and social concerns that we're facing?
We have. So, like you have been, we've been thinking about this question for a while. So I have 3 slides queued up to talk about this specifically. The first, how do we talk about money when there's economic fallout from the pandemic-related unemployment? So we've said this before, there's no shame in a household pledging less this year than in other years. Every gift matters. So Sarah talked about the guilt that we carry about money and the shame. So there is no shame. Every gift matters. It's all important. So we form our stewardship committee and our vestries and our leadership to remind people that this is not about duty. This is not about guilt. This is not about shame. That's not why we give. It's about mission and our ability to contribute to it. And your ability to also take care of your own needs. We trust that when you make a pledge, you're making your pledge prayerfully, faithfully, and without doing harm to yourself or your family, right? We need you to do those things. That will lead you to making the right pledge. So believe that and teach others to do that. Remember that not everybody's experiencing this in the same way. So this goes back to that point. We can ask for people to increase their giving this year, and some will rise up to that occasion because they can. Others won't, and that's fine, but let's ask. Every conversation about money and pledging is pastoral. We talk about this. We load so much onto our money, our hopes, our retirement plans, our fears, our children, our, sending kids off to college, our medical needs, all of these things are always swimming around when we talk about our money, and they impact our ability to pledge. And so when I have a conversation with someone about their pledge or about a major gift, I spend this much time talking about money, and the rest of the conversation is about how they're doing and what's going on in their lives, because we attach all of that to our money and our security and our wealth. So remember that you may get into some really interesting conversations, and allow that blessing, that grace to be what it is. You are capable of hearing this and holding that conversation and having it with people and listening to what they're really saying. We use our pledges to talk about so many things in our church lives. Also remember, we've recently been through a recession, and we got through it, and we got over it, and we recovered. So it's in our memories. 2008 is not such a long time ago that we can't remember what it did to our budgets and what it did to our families and our households, and also how we came through it and got together again. So that reminds us that we are hopeful people. Christians are hopeful, and we think about that and we focus on what the future brings to us. Finally, the work of the church does not go away just because the financial markets are in chaos, right? In fact, they perhaps are more acute. More people need to be fed. Maybe more people need the resources that you offer, or are just hungry for community. So the work that you're doing doesn't go away. And this is a reminder to keep it mission focused. Another question that's going to come up for many of us this year in our stewardship campaigns is how to talk about stewardship if your congregation is facing budget cuts, program cuts, or staff reductions.
Yeah.
You're still asking people to make their gifts, even if they're seeing a change in their church budget. Again, focus on what you are doing. The work of the church continues. We may have fewer resources, so we find other ways to do the work that God has given us to do. Another really helpful part of this conversation is to remind your staff and your members that we have been working. If you applied for an SBA payroll protection loan and got it, or if you applied and didn't get it, you tried. It reminds people that we have been thinking about your mission, our budget, our work together, and planning for it, and trying to reduce the impact of this moment as much as we can on our mission and ministry. This goes towards some goodwill and saying, we're not just sitting here trying to shake you for more money. We've been doing a lot of work internally to make certain that our ministry can continue to support itself. And so we've done this work, and we're asking you to have faith in us to do this work. And remember that there are some gifts that are extraordinary out there still. Some people may have sources of income from other places. You may have been saving these people for a future capital campaign, but now might be the time to say, can you make this big gift? Because we need it for our operations this year. We're in really tough shape. So be ready to talk about your stewardship and your mission. And one more sticky situation is the uncertainty. So we don't know, we're asking people, if 2020 has taught us anything, it's that everything changes and you don't know this month what next month is going to be like, right? Because it just keeps changing on us. That's a hard time to go into stewardship. And it's a hard time to think about next year's budget, because we're trying to plan for things that we just don't know. Will this virus stick around even longer than we expect? Will the economic fallout get worse before it gets better? And those aren't designed to give you fear and anxiety, but they are things that we are thinking about as we move into stewardship. So I remind us that we as Christians know how to deal with uncertainty. We have done this as a community from our beginnings, when we were a persecuted group of people trying to figure out how to meet, until now, when we are still trying to figure out how we fit into the landscape of our culture and talk about the gospel and educate and bring and form people into faithful people of God. So we are people of hope, and we have to focus on that hope. Also, it's always good to remind people that if they make a pledge now and something happens, it is perfectly okay to change your pledge. And that's a pastoral conversation that does not need to be scary or anxiety filling. It is, my circumstances have changed. I still want to participate. Maybe I'm going to make my gift. I'm going to stop payment now and make it up later. Maybe I'm reducing my pledge. I get these all the time in my work, and it's just, it's then an opportunity for me to say thank you. Thank you for what you have done. Thank you for what you're willing to do. Thank you for letting us know. And how can we pray for you? What are you going through? What do you need? Is there another resource that I can link you up with? It's a great way to have these beautiful conversations with people. They need not be fear-filled. They are beautiful moments of ministry with each other.
And if that can become part of our culture, the culture of our churches, then that helps all of our stewardship work down the line.
Absolutely. Sarah, do you have some things to say about this as a priest walking through these slides and these moments? And I know we also have some questions.
Some questions, so I'm paying attention to those. But I think so much of this is I'm with you on all this. That reminder that a pledge is what I intend to do, recognizing that we're in the middle of uncharted territory, and things can always change, but they really can change in the middle of a pandemic. I think relationship is the key to this work. And one of the things that I'm noticing in the questions that are coming in that I just sort of wanted to highlight is, so these are ideas, and there are sort of our best ways of approaching them, but you know your own context and you know where you are. So what works at St. Catherine's in Marietta may not work at wherever. So I would use your God-given knowledge and resources to take the information we're giving you and work with it. So with that, I'm going to move us into questions, if that's good.
Please.
Okay. Renee wants to know, our priest is retiring at the end of the month. At the moment, we don't have another priest, and we'll be doing morning prayer for the foreseeable future. How do you explain the need for people to give more when we don't have clergy and we don't know when we're going to get one?
Well, again, this is about, it's not a transaction, right? So we're not giving because of what we get. Our staff costs may go down or may be temporarily changed if we're not paying for salary and benefits of a priest, but we're going to have to engage in a search at some point, and that will cost money. And so will the new priest coming in will expect a salary and benefits. So we want to make certain that the money is available for them. But more than that, I would say, are you doing other things besides worship in church? Are you doing other things? Does your stewardship provide other gifts to your community, including the gift of being present in your community? So are you a resource? Are you providing meals or meeting space once we can open our buildings again? What are you doing for your community? A few years ago, a great organization did a nationwide survey of giving and community outreach in churches. And this is what they discovered, that every church, synagogue, and mosque across the country gives an average of $1.1 million a year in services to their community. That's just what you do by opening your doors. And that includes mega churches with thousands of members, and it includes tiny churches. It's an average number. So $1.1 million of stuff that you return into your community on average. That's just by being there, by having doors open, maybe AA groups that meet, maybe it's the ministries that you provide, it's shelter, all of that. So that's what your gifts are going to. It's not a transactional thing. I would just help people form that.
That's great. Thanks, Davey. I think this next one is around time, talent, and treasure. So how do you convince members who say they have given their time to church in forms of volunteer activities that would normally be paid activities, time versus talent versus treasure? I think that goes to that transactional piece again a little bit, doesn't it?
Right. So for example, perhaps we're not able to pay an administrator, and so people are there doing the bulletin or answering the phones, or maybe it's about maintenance, people cleaning the building, or maybe it's about youth education. We can't afford a Sunday school teacher right now, or a youth mentor. So people are taking that on. Certainly, I think that there's an ability, those are gifts that we give. Nonprofits, churches are nonprofits, have ways of quantifying volunteer hours. If you really need to talk with your treasurer, probably your own local treasurer may or may not know how to do this, but your diocesan office certainly knows how to help you with the tax implications if somebody really wants to write off their time or talk about that. You can do that, but I would remind us that we are, participating in Christian community is also rolling up our sleeves from time to time, and it's work that has to be done. We are volunteer organizations. We can't survive without the time and the talent piece of stewardship, and forming those equally, forming people who are generous in their time and the gifts that they can offer is as important as forming people to be grateful, generous financial givers as well.
We need all three. We need to work on building up all three of those. Yeah. Should the rector's pledge be a line item in the budget? I have listed my pledge as rector for the last 15 years to lead by example. That's from Benjamin.
Wow, that's bold and beautiful, and I think it's really, helpful if your congregation responds well to that, and it works for you. I think that's great. I think it's unusual. I haven't heard a lot of other congregations that do that. And that's not to say unusual is bad. I love unusual things. And so I would wonder how that does work for you. And I wonder if other people have that experience. I think it's a great idea to be able to communicate and remind people that our clergy also are pledgers. And if nothing else comes from it, to remind people that clergy fill out pledge forms and make gifts too, to support the ministry. So whether that's included as a line item or not is up to you, but reminding people that
Mhm.
our clergy are among our most faithful givers.
I know that there's a bishop back when he was a priest. I don't know if he still does this as a bishop, but he would send out a letter to his congregation, and it would say, I make this much money, my wife makes this much money, together we pledge this much money. So,
Wow.
and that was the start of his rector's letter every year, so that people saw what he was doing, what his family was opting to do. It was very transparent.
Yep, very transparent.
Question: will these slides be available in Spanish?
Yes.
Great.
We have it in English and in Spanish. I will email you both the presentations after this call. There'll be an email that goes out to everyone who participated, and please use them.
Mary would like to know, much or most of the secular world has reduced expenses to better prepare for the long haul, even though not yet forced to cut costs. Our church has not yet done this. Do you think parishioners will ask about this, thinking it irresponsible to not cut costs?
I think you'll have some folks at stewardship time or at your annual meeting who are looking at the budget and asking those questions. And I think that there's some responsibility to ask those questions. I think it's up to you and your congregation how you're going to address that. Again, I fall into the Christians or people of hope category often. And while we do need to be solvent, and we can't be reckless with our gifts and our money, we also need to remember that our work has to be accomplished. How much can you cut before you are diminished so much that you're no longer providing what your community needs? And so, yes, I think we can reduce some things every once in a while, but if we do it too fast, or if we do it out of fear, then I think we're missing the message there.
John would like to know, how do you avoid the implicit obligation that comes with the word pledge? We use giving goal in our parish.
Use the language that your congregation likes. Certainly, we use pledge and we use stewardship and we talk about stewardship campaigns. But if your congregation reacts differently to that, there's great theology around why you would talk about gifts instead of pledges, where you talk about goals. I love that. I ask people who make financial goals instead of pledges, just as I ask people who make pledges to think about the other things they're pledging this year. So are you pledging to invite a certain number of new members? Are you pledging to work a number of Saturdays in a ministry? Like what are your giving goals in general to your congregation that aren't just financial? This goes back to the time, talent, treasure. I love goal setting.
That's great. Patty asks, how do you answer those who say that since the church building is closed, therefore you don't need the money, therefore I'll reduce my pledge, that person has not suffered financially? I think that goes back to the transactional piece, right?
Yeah, that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. The work of the church is not diminished. In fact, it's perhaps more acute than it has been in many years because of the needs of our community. So people are still working even though the doors are closed. And this is a moment. So we say that, and we can say that, but you as the person having that conversation with the person who's asked that question need to believe it and know it and be able to talk about it. That's important.
Okay, Paula would like to know the name and date of that study about the 1.1 million in services. And so I wrote that down on a notepad on the things that we need to get to people later. So
I'll get it to you. It comes from Partners for Sacred Places. And I will reference the study and send you out a link.
And oh my goodness, we are caught up in the Q&A section.
Right, because I'm going to move on. We're moving through our time as well, and we still have some slides to go. So let's talk. Sorry, Sarah, I cut you off in your cue, but I'm just going to move forward.
Oh.
So let's talk a little bit about the other resources that are a part of your TENS package this year. I'm going to go through these a little quickly because you have access to them. But we've talked about the weekly bulletin inserts. They go from October 4th through November 22nd. They give us a real diversity of voices across the country lay folks and ordained folks from all parts of the Episcopal Church have come and made beautiful theological um, conversation starters for you to use. And these are great ways to begin conversations about the theology of stewardship campaigns in your congregation. We've been talking about these small groups. So I want to focus a little bit of time on these because it's one of our key recommendations for your stewardship program this year. We're recommending that you host some small groups to focus and form your stewardship this year. This helps people get into an intimate group where they can ask the questions about the budget, where they can talk about why they give, and how they can invite each other into it. We recommend that your stewardship committee, your vestry or bishops committee, volunteer to be these small group leaders. And if you're meeting on Zoom, if you're lucky enough to meet in person, that's great. But if you can meet on Zoom, we expect that you can be able to do that. So the job description for a small group leader, they should have already made their own pledge. They're committed to stewardship, and they embrace the theme or know the theme of faith-filled generosity. Why are we doing this? How are we formed? They know and they believe in the case for giving. So this goes back to that question. You should be able to answer how the money comes in and how it's spent. If you don't know the answers to that, you should be able to refer them to the folks who do. So if that question comes up and you say, wow, I really don't know how we do that or why we do that, you can refer them to someone who can give them the answer. Small group leaders don't have all the answers, but they are good listeners and facilitators. And this is really important, I think, when we think about doing this formation work, that we are forming together. We're not teaching. This isn't didactic. This is about forming community around stewardship themes. So there's intimacy, vulnerability, support. Your small group leaders, if you're doing them virtually, should be able to handle the technology. Train them on Zoom if they don't know how to use it, so that they can run a meeting and know how to invite people into conversation. Make sure that your hosts have time to do this. They're not just saying yes, or you didn't tell them to do this, that they really have the will and the time to do and devote to stewardship this year. How many small groups do you need? I like groups that have about 12 people maximum. I find more than that, and in an hour you can't get everyone to talk. Less than 6, you start to really stretch things out too much or rely on the one person who speaks a lot, me often in a group. I like 12, it's a good number. Each group should be able to meet at least 3 times. What's that, Sarah?
Jesus like 12.
Jesus like, it's a good number. It's a good number. How do these groups form? I've seen lots of creative ways that congregations are doing this. Some of them are assigning the groups based on, alphabet and the directory. Some are allowing the community members to select, let's say you have a group of 12, you might put 8 people you know in, 4 people you don't know, so that you can shake up your groups and meet new people and combine people. Some folks are allowing people to sign up for a group. Maybe they make a Google Doc and they allow people to slot themselves into a group so that people are in control of their own destiny. However you do that, allow these groups to form and then support them. So we recommend that you have at least 3 small group meetings this year. One where you present the materials and you kick off. I've heard some congregations are going to do this work on Kickoff Sunday, where they have a Zoom coffee hour where they talk about everything they're doing, and then they're going to use Zoom breakout meetings to immediately start those small groups. I love that. It's great. You got everyone together. It's an easy way to do it. There might be other ways that you form small groups during the week or weeknights or however your community does that. Let them know all of the materials and ensure that everybody has their materials and their pledge cards. You can email them out. We recommend that one of the small group sessions be a Bible study. I know Episcopalians and the Bible don't always spend a whole lot of time together, but there are lots of great resources for readings and teaching on the theology of abundance and stewardship, and we're gonna share a slide with you in a minute that goes through a lot of them, which you'll then have to take away with you. And that third meeting is about vision and mission. So I suggest that after you've formed and after you've had a Bible study, you then engage a dreaming conversation with your small group. We'll look in more detail about what this looks like in a minute, but invite them to be a part of the planning and the strategy and the life and the mission. Small group, Bible topics. This is a big slide. We'll give this to you. You can take it away. You don't have to furiously take notes for this. But these are just a few of the scriptures in Hebrew and Christian tradition that help us think about the theology of our stewardship. Any one of these are great jumping off points for a small group discussion. What does that small group Bible study format look like? So you've done this many times probably in your congregation. It's a modified Lectio Divina in a way where you read the passage maybe 3 times in 3 different voices, each time asking a different question. What stands out for you? What is this passage saying to you? What are God and Jesus saying in this passage to you? And then finally, what are you called to do? And I think these 3 questions are really important because it's a funnel that gets you to think through, what am I supposed to do now that I've read this passage and discussed it with my friends and thought about it theologically? So that last question, what are you called to do through this passage, either through your understanding of stewardship or your participation in your community? I talked about that final small group meeting, the appreciative inquiry questions. Many of you probably use appreciative inquiry in running meetings. If you haven't encountered it before, it's a real simple way of focusing our thought on what's possible. It intentionally asks people questions in a positive frame. What's good, what's exciting, what do you like to do? It purposely does not ask or frame questions in a negative, like what problem are we trying to solve? What could we be doing better? Those will come up in the conversations, and certainly they're embraced and you can deal with them. But if you ask the question from the leading point of possibility, you'll get people to think about the possibility and the vision and the excitement. So we give you a few examples here of questions that you could use in your small groups around that visioning and engaging part. Finally, in that last meeting, I recommend that this is the one where the small group leader invites you to make the pledge. So this isn't to say you're asking for an amount or that you know what they gave last year. We talked about that earlier. This is to say, will you join me in supporting the mission of our church? And ask them for an answer. Yes, no, I need more time. And then be able to respond to them with that. So these are those moments that we can queue up to have beautiful, intentional conversation. You're asking them to join you. Will you join me? Here are some next steps on what that looks like. Before we go on to our liturgical resources, what are some questions that are coming up? I'm also aware of our time.
Yeah, we have some great ones, and I'm going to consolidate a couple of them because there's some in a similar vein. There's a couple of concerns about congregations who are not comfortable with technology, and what do we do if our folks don't like Zoom? How do we keep them from feeling left out?
Yep.
And we can't meet.
Right. So Zoom the benefit of Zoom is that it relies, yes, on a web platform like we're doing today, and you can see cameras. It also involves the good old-fashioned telephone, which is a technology that most people, I hope, by now are comfortable with. And so if you have people who really want to participate in these small groups, there's a phone number. With every Zoom meeting that you set up, there's a way that people can call in. Now, they won't be able to see and be seen, but they will be able to hear and be heard. And that's a way for some folks who are just like, I don't want to deal with that, or I'm limited in my bandwidth at home, or I don't have a laptop with a cam, whatever it is. You can pick up your landline or your cell phone and participate in Zoom. Um, if you're able to run these groups in person, great. But as we've experienced with virtual church, it does rely on people to make some commitment to embracing technology, and we make it as safe and as easy as possible. One really quick related story to that happened in a congregation here in the Bay Area, Transfiguration in San Mateo. When they first went virtual, they had a cohort of Gen Z digital natives call up people who were technologically uncomfortable and walk them through, here's how you set up Zoom on your iPad or your laptop or whatever. Here's how you do it. Let me help you. It was the most amazing intergenerational conversations that happened between these kids and their elders. And it was beautiful. They may not even see each other on a given Sunday, but they were talking together about the technology. So if you have folks in your congregation that are willing to do that,
We've had that work in our congregation, not a lot, but some, and it's been great. People are like, I don't know how to get on Facebook. Let us help you. And we've had somebody walk them through it on the phone. It's been great. It's a great pastoral touch. So I'm watching these again. Someone wants to talk about New Consecration Sunday. Past several years, we've been using New Consecration Sunday process that follows not fundraising to a budget, but rather forming the budget after the pledges are in. Do you have thoughts on that?
Sure, I do. I'm also just conscious of the time,
Yeah.
and I will answer that question and all the other questions that we have time for, as long as you're willing to stay on with us. If you have to leave because you've made other commitments, I want to remind you that we're recording this and we'll send it to you afterward along with the slides. So just wanted to make that point as we approach the 90-minute mark here. And your questions are great.
They're really good.
I love New Consecration Sunday. It's a really good method. It's not the one that we're recommending here with our outline. I like it. It does that work of not fundraising to the budget, and I think that that's important in every stewardship cycle that we talk about. We're talking about mission. This is why a narrative budget is a really beautiful way to talk about fundraising and how a church spends money, because it gets off the line items of utilities and things like that, and it focuses on, we spend 25% of our budget on youth, we spend 17% of our budget on worship and ourselves. Probably it's more than that, but whatever we do, we're able to share those percentages and tell the story through a narrative budget. I think it's a lot more helpful than talking about a budget in general. New Consecration Sunday heavily relies on those in-person meetings, though, and so you're going to have to figure out how you're doing the preaching. Obviously, your lunches and dinners are going to have to be virtual, so think that one through. It's a great model, though.
Catherine asks a great question. Would the 12 in the small group include family members, or would different family members be in different groups? Important for dual family incomes or those with unmarried adults to make separate financial decisions?
I love that. Do what you do. I lead some small groups in my own congregation, and I have a Tuesday night group, and the wife is there, and a Wednesday night group, and the husband is there, because they want different experiences, and we're talking about different things too. I love it. Break households up if they want to be broken up. If they want to join together, that's great. People come at their stewardship or their pledges in different ways, and if they make their own gifts, Sure, they can be a part of different groups.
Marty would like to know how you can encourage people to attend coffee hour when they find out that stewardship is the focus.
Oh, come on, stewardship's great. Are you kidding? We
I'll
love
tackle that
stewardship.
for a second. Do you have a good answer? I have
No,
a
go
decent.
for it.
I don't have a great answer, but I have a good one. One of the things that we've discovered about our coffee hours, like the first few times we did it, people were really excited, and we go around and check in with everybody. But like by the fourth or fifth time, people were like, "Yeah, I'm still here. I have nothing new to report." So we started doing small groups with really specific questions, and people are loving being in small groups, even though they're virtually, and they're with people they would never be with on Sunday morning, or often are with people they wouldn't be with. So I would offer to you, some of this may be in how you choose to talk about it, that if stewardship is a really scary word for your church, this is a way to help delve into stewardship not becoming scary, but actually becoming a wonderful word. If there's a pattern, or you can create a pattern for small group conversations online as part of coffee hour, this is just what we're talking about for the next couple of weeks. And I can tell you from personal experience, we've had a great response to that. And not everybody comes. I mean, like it is still a small crowd that comes to coffee hour. Not everybody in your congregation is going to sign up to be in a small group, but there are people who are really craving community, and there are people who are really curious about stewardship. So.
And there are people who will show up to small group who won't show up to virtual services. We've noticed that in my congregation as well. There are people who want to show up to the Wednesday night discussion who never show up to the Sunday morning live stream.
Right.
Church is church. Figure it out.
Exactly. How do you encourage or persuade parishioners to participate in a group that they know is formed for the sole purpose of discussing give? I think we just covered this one. Yeah. Trying to get them to give more. We have a difficult time.
Give.
I was going to say, yeah, this is not about encouraging, like, you need to give more.
No hard sell here.
Right. We've had a difficult time trying to get people to join or oriented around storytelling or Bible study. So.
Really? So, I mean, I think that the Bible is the greatest storybook ever, right? I mean, it's full of stories, and it's how we model our storytelling. So I think we use any of these as jumping off places. What is a parable except a story and a gift? I love this. We're not always comfortable unlocking the possibility of storytelling from Scripture, because we may have some feelings about how to deal with Scripture and how we hear it and read it. And that's about your community. If you have folks who treat Scripture in a more literal way, then there's some work that you might do with them about that in our Episcopal way of thinking about Scripture. If they're able to unlock metaphor and explore storytelling, then the Bible's full of great options for that too.
Mary's talking about Bible study, so this seems a good time to ask that question. What's your experience of using small groups already formed, like men's Bible study, women's Bible study, outreach committee, etc., to form these small groups? I love it.
Yeah, if they're already doing their stuff, invite them to bring stewardship in as a theme.
And using, I mean, not to be like PR girl for our stuff, but using the way the setup as you've given it to us, it's pretty easy to do. It's not going to be a huge ask of your facilitators to right. Pivot a little bit.
We've intentionally made it really easy to adopt this year.
Yeah. Tracy would like to know, when do you discuss fundraising that will need to change due to COVID? For example, our fair is a large portion of our budget, so which I'm assuming they're not going to be doing. So.
No, don't assume that they're not going to be doing it. So sign up for our webinar on September 12th, where we talk about how to do galas, auctions, and events online. So yes, still do your fundraising event if that's how you raise money in your congregation. Just going to have to do it virtually this year, and we'll walk you through it. So we have a webinar ready for you.
Excellent. Bo said that he felt like we went past the program slide insert pretty quickly and would like to go over it again. I don't know that we have time for that, but I know that, Bo, we will send you that insert.
Yeah, we'll send you the program guide so that you can walk through it. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry about the timing. You all
There's a
have great
lot.
questions, so I want to answer them.
And we are over time. So I'm wondering if we want to move on and then we'll take final questions.
Sure. The last section really is about the offertory. And so, Sarah, I cut you off again.
No, you didn't.
Okay, great.
Well, I mean,
So I want just 3 more slides to talk about ways that we can elevate our giving during the time of stewardship. So one of them is through the offertory. So I love this. We get it in our church pension group calendar every year. Show me the money is not one of the approved offertory sentences. So we have some for you. Really good friend of mine, Kay Sylvester of the Diocese of Los Angeles, has written some alternate offertory sentences, and she was thinking about virtual church as she was doing it. Kay is a great stewardship person. She's also a wonderful theologian and a great person. I suggest you all get to know her. But she gave us these to use, and they help frame that conversation about our theology of stewardship and put it into the offertory. So the offertory, I don't know what your experience of the offertory has been during virtual church services, but I've discovered that in many cases, since we're not passing offering plates, and since the elements aren't being brought forward because they're sitting there right on the credence table if we are doing spiritual communion, the drama, the moment of energy at the offertory is missing from our virtual online services. So how do we bring that moment back into our thinking as we create liturgies around the stewardship season? So one of them is through these offertory sentences. So we've invited with the offertory sentence, and what we do sacramentally is we invite, gather, bless, and break, right? So we've invited with the offertory sentence. We take a moment. This was Sarah's question earlier about being a televangelist. In the moment of the offertory, let's highlight the fact that giving is happening, whether people are mailing in checks, making gifts online, giving pledges are being offered and fulfilled and completed, gifts are happening. People do this in a number of ways. They show envelopes, they show, maybe if you're using Facebook Live, you could even use this moment to say, make your weekly gift now, and we'll give you a moment of silence where people take out their phone and they do their thing, or they do it on Facebook. It's not a televangelist moment. You're not flashing it on the screen. It's just a way to acknowledge that we make gifts, and this is the time in our service when we would be doing that. So let's do it. We bless those gifts that have come forward. So we don't have the drama of the offering plates arriving at the altar, but we can still bless what has happened with the priest at the altar to do that moment of acknowledgement and blessing. And then we remind people that our gifts are broken and shared. So as we think through what our money does, it provides, yes, our budget, but it's providing so much more for the mission. So this would be a great time right at the offertory to remind people of the ministries that our churches and your stewardship pledge fund. So whatever those are, feeding programs and tutoring programs and outreach and recovery programs, all the thousands of things that Episcopal churches do across the country, bring them into the moment of sacrament and remind people about it. That's the last slide. So we'll ask questions about this or anything else.
The last question I have actually is the perfect last question, which is, there's another stewardship webinar in 2 weeks. How will it be different from this one?
The next stewardship webinar is specifically about those small groups. We're going to spend a lot of time doing the formation piece on how we create really intentional community in small groups for stewardship. So while we talked about some job descriptions and an overall, we're going to go into a lot more detail about how we form grace-filled and grateful givers through small groups. So creating that community. And that's not, of course, this year we'll be doing it virtually, but these are lessons that we can do throughout the year as we think about our theology of stewardship. So yes, that's happening in 2 weeks.
Woohoo! All right. That's all the questions that I have.
Beautiful.
The Q&A.
Are there any?
Will the next session be recorded? We're so close.
All of our sessions. Every session will be recorded and posted onto Facebook, sent out to the participants, and also put onto our website. So you'll be able to see the YouTube of the recording and get the PowerPoints, which are in English and in Spanish.
Y'all have asked great questions.
Thank you, because it's your questions that make this really important for us. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment because I have something else to share with you. I want to put in our links to a survey that I'm going to ask you to do. It's only 3 questions. It'll take you 2 minutes. Also a reminder of how you can access this year's resources with the password, and a sign up for upcoming webinars. We've been talking about them, but we'll be having at least 2 more scheduled. And we have another one about plan giving in the works with Timothy, one of our board members. We'll be doing some other webinars. So your feedback helps us create the next series of webinars. So please do take just 2 minutes to answer 3 questions, and that will help us form next year, or the next sessions that we do between now and October. Are there any other questions we can answer for you? Oh,
Can
good.
we get the slides soon? How soon do we get them?
I'll send them out this afternoon. I'll send them out this afternoon.
Are you doing the survey now? Or?
Yeah, the survey, I sent it out. It's in the chat.
Okay.
So everyone should be able to access it. And I will also put it in the email that goes out today.
Sounds good.
Oh, maybe it just went to all panelists. Oh, yeah, sorry about that. There you go. Now everyone.
I'm seeing people I know on the panel, on the Q&A, and it's fun.
Has everyone received the survey now? There we go. There it is. Yay, thank you. Took me a while to learn how to use Zoom. Well, thank you. Thank you for signing up today. Thank you for sticking with us for longer than we had anticipated. It's really, really wonderful to have such great participation from y'all. So thank you. Is there anything else we can do for you today?
Paula didn't get the survey, so Paula, that should be in your email if you're not seeing it now. And
yeah.
Thank y'all for the nice notes. That's always nice.
Thanks for your feedback.
Yeah.
I just put it back into the chat, so you should be able to get links and for the survey and for our upcoming webinars. All right, friends, thank you very much for being members of TENS, the Episcopal Network for Stewardship, for doing your stewardship campaigns and the very hard and faithful work that it is to raise money in congregations, especially in this moment that we are in. We are standing with you. We're preparing resources for you. If we can help you perfect or adapt those resources, send me an email, which I'm putting into the chat right now, and ask me more specific questions. I'm happy to get on the phone with you or send you some emails and help you walk through things. This is my work. I love it. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to help you all. Sarah, any closing ideas?
No, just this was really fun for me. So thanks for having me join you, Davey. And thank you guys for asking such good questions. They're good things to be thinking about. So it's exciting. It's exciting to see the breadth of the church out there.
It is. All right, friends. We'll see you in 2 weeks and talk to you soon. Let us know how we can help. Bye.